Hello and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching Newsnight on DD India, your prime-time destination for news and bespoke analysis. It's good to see you all again. All right, on the show tonight, have the democracies of the world put China on notice? Well, it seems so because the NATO adopted a tough line on China at Joe Biden's debut summit. And the G7 before that criticized China for a host of issues, not least of which was the treatment, actually mistreatment, of its Uyghur minorities. So, the fact that both NATO and G7 have issued back-to-back statements criticizing China, does it indicate that the world is at an inflection point? And now that the major democracies of the world have united to slam China, what is in it for India, you might wonder? And how will it affect India's ties with China? Also on the show, India remembers its braves who laid down their life while pushing the Chinese army back in the Galwan Valley. All that and much more coming up over the next 1 hour. But first, as always, the headlines. Decline in new COVID-19 infections in India, only 60,000 new cases reported in the last 24 hours. It's the lowest in 75 days. Active caseload falls below 1 million. Recovery rate at 96.64%. Daily positivity rate is at 3.45%. Health Ministry warns against complacency as restrictions are lifted. Vaccine trials on children picks up pace. Screening of children of 6 to 12 years of age begins after phase 1 of co-vaccine trials on children aged 12 to 18. Health Ministry cautions people against fear-mongering, urges people to exercise caution. India achieves another milestone in its COVID vaccination program. 260 million people inoculated so far. The Serum Institute of India, Pune, to soon begin manufacture of the Novavax vaccine. It promises to be effective against more virus variants. States continue to relax or lift COVID-19 lockdown. Bihar announces new guidelines. Shops to remain open from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. from Wednesday. Jharkhand relaxes Unlock 3 restrictions. Himachal Pradesh issues travel advisory for tourists. Visitors to register online for an e-pass. Prime Minister Narendra Modi to deliver the keynote address at the 5th edition of Viva Tech on Wednesday. PM has been invited as the guest of honor to deliver the keynote address at Viva Tech 2021, one of the largest digital and startup events in Europe. It's held in Paris every year since 2016. India remembers the fallen soldiers at Galwan Valley. Army Chief General M.M. Naravane and all ranks of the army paid tribute on the first anniversary of their supreme sacrifice. And Union Minister for Tribal Affairs Arjun Munda inaugurates the new head office of Tribal Cooperative Marketing Development Federation in New Delhi. Also launches Sankalp Se Siddhi Mission Bandhan and other programs, move to transform the lives of tribals. Welcome. Now it's been 1 year since the brave soldiers of the Indian Army gave a befitting response to the Chinese soldiers at Galwan Valley in eastern Ladakh. 20 Indian soldiers embraced martyrdom. The act of valor made the world sit up and take notice of the strength and commitment of the Indian Army to defend the country's territorial integrity. Also, it drove home the point where it mattered, that challenging India's sovereignty will invite a stinging reprisal and entail huge costs.
The nation is remembering its heroes. India is paying heartfelt tribute to the brave hearts who were martyred during the deadly clash in eastern Ladakh's Galwan Valley 1 year ago. It was on the intervening night of 15th and 16th June when 20 Indian soldiers were martyred while trying to stop Chinese soldiers from entering the Indian side of the line of actual control. Led by Colonel Santosh Babu, the soldiers gave a befitting reply to the Chinese and inflicted heavy damages to the adversary. Chief of Army Staff General M.M. Naravane and all ranks of Indian Army paid rich tributes to the soldiers who made supreme sacrifice while protecting India's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Major General Akash Kaushik, COS, Fire and Fury Corps, laid wreath at the War Memorial in Leh and saluted their unmatched valor and courage. Colonel Santosh Babu was posthumously awarded the second highest military decoration of India, the Mahavir Chakra, on the Republic Day this year. 5 other warriors were awarded the Veer Chakra. These were Naib Subedar Nanduram Soren, Naib Subedar Deepak Singh, Havaldar K. Palani of Bihar Regiment, Sipoy Gurteej Singh, and Havaldar Tejinder Singh of Punjab Regiment. Experts now believe that Indian Defence Forces in Ladakh sector are well prepared to give a tough fight to China.
गलवान में जो 15 जून को पिछले साल हुआ था वो एक गेम चेंजर था, वो एक टर्निंग पॉइंट था गलवान का। बहुत सारे गलवान और हो सकते थे और उन्हें प्लान करे होंगे, लेकिन हमारे रिएक्शन की वजह से, कल संतोष बाबू उनके आर्मी के रिएक्शन की वजह से, उनके रिटेलिएशन की वजह से बाकी गलवान नहीं हुए। तो ये वहाँ पर जो है उसकी वजह से एक साल से वहाँ पर एक रिलेटेड पीस है, एक वहाँ पर इक्विलिब्रियम है।
राफेल के आने के बाद चीन बौखला गया है। चीन को मालूम है कि हिंदुस्तान जिस प्रकार से ज्यादा पेलोड लेकर के फ्लाई करता है वो बेनिफिट चीन को नहीं मिलता है।
Meanwhile, India has held several rounds of core commander level talks with China to resolve the dispute. India has also engaged China in diplomatic talks. The External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. S. Jaishankar, Defence Minister Rajnath Singh and National Security Advisor Ajit Doval held talks with their respective Chinese counterparts following the incident. The beginning of the year 2021 saw India and China disengaging their troops in Pangong Lake after both the nations reached a consensus. The Indian Defence Forces have time and again stood up to the challenges in eastern Ladakh. India has shown that its brave hearts are ever ready to ward off any challenge posed by the enemy and can make any sacrifice to protect its integrity. With inputs from Sudhir Yadav, Bureau Report, DD India.
All right, let me now turn to a cover story. It's about the new age multilateral diplomacy. After 4 tumultuous years under Donald Trump, US President Joe Biden says America is back. And it was on full display at the recently concluded NATO and G7 summits. Significantly, China is neither a member of G7 nor NATO, but China was the proverbial elephant in the room as the US and its allies and partners met to discuss about what democracies can do to counter China's belligerence. Here's a report. 2 cities, 2 summits, 1 outcome. The major democracies of the world have put China on notice. The G7 summit that was held in the British city of Cornwall and NATO summit in Brussels issued unprecedented back-to-back statements critical of China. It marked a decisive shift in global mood against China as the US and its allies and partners joined forces to push back against Beijing's belligerence. NATO leaders warned on Monday that China presents quote-unquote systemic challenges. They took a forceful stance towards Beijing in a communique issued towards the end of their talks. The NATO leaders said China's stated ambitions and assertive behavior present systemic challenges to the rules-based international order and to areas relevant to alliance security. US President Joe Biden urged his fellow NATO leaders to stand up to China's authoritarianism and growing military might. A change of focus for an alliance created to defend Europe from the Soviet Union during the Cold War.
I think we're in a contest, not with China per se, but a contest with autocrats, autocratic governments around the world, as whether or not democracies can compete with them in the rapidly changing 21st century. And I think how we act and whether we pull together as democracies is going to determine whether our grandkids look back 15 years from now and say, did they step up? Are democracies as relevant and as powerful as they have been?
The language in the NATO summit's communique, which will set the path for alliance policy, came a day after the G7 explicitly mentioned China in a joint statement. The G7 came down hard on human rights abuses in Xinjiang, pushed for retaining Hong Kong's autonomy, and called for peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. The G7 leaders and NATO nations jointly criticized core Chinese policy under President Xi Jinping for its harmful impact on military stability, human rights, international trade, and global health. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says the G7 meeting was a significant move forward from where the G7 has ever been before and reflects a growing convergence that wasn't there a few years ago. There is a broad view that China represents a significant challenge to the world's democracies. Words like counter and compete were words coming out of the mouths of every leader in the room, not just Joe Biden.
I think that China is, as I've said many times, a gigantic fact in our lives and a new strategic consideration for NATO, which after all has spent so much of its time in the last 72 years thinking about the Soviet Union, then of course the former Soviet Union, the various security threats posed from that area. But I think when it comes to China, you've got to, I don't think anybody around the table today wants to descend into a new Cold War with China. I don't think that's where people are, but I think people see, they see challenges.
The 1-2 punch of public criticism smacks directly into Xi's assertion that China won't stand for lecturing by other nations. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau summed up the mood in many a world capital when he said the US and its allies have agreed to coordinate their response to the challenges posed by China, quote, much more closely. Bureau Report, DD India. And there's another big story we are tracking here on Newsnight tonight. A neutral Switzerland will host one of the most anticipated meetings between the leaders of the US and Russia on Wednesday. Now, an 18th century Swiss villa overlooking Lake Geneva will be the venue of the talks between US President Joe Biden and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. The setting may be serene and tranquil, but the statements by both the leaders before the talks are much like a high-octane trailer before the release of a pulp fiction Hollywood thriller.
Villa La Grange along Lake Geneva and its 30-hectare park offer a stunning view of the Lake Geneva. Come June 16th, the villa, which houses a collection of ancient leather-bound books, is set to witness one of the most anticipated chapters in modern diplomacy. US President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin are set to hold their summit in the 18th century villa, a soothing setting for what promises to be heated talks. Sharp disputes over election interference, cyber attacks, human rights, and Ukraine will hang over their first face-to-face meeting since Joe Biden took office on January 20th. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that he is open to dialogue on a range of subjects at the summit. Speaking with US television network in an interview released by the Kremlin on Tuesday, Putin said that while relations with the US were at their lowest point in recent years, there were areas of cooperation that would benefit both the countries.
все-таки есть вопрос.
We have a bilateral relationship that has deteriorated to what is the lowest point in recent years. However, there are still matters that need a certain amount of note comparing and identification and determination of mutual positions so that issues of mutual interest can be solved more effectively to the benefit of both the United States and Russia.
Сферы боевых действий.
On the other hand, US President Joe Biden has said that the meeting with Putin would be critical and that he would offer to Moscow to cooperate on areas of common interest if the Kremlin so chooses. Speaking at the news conference after a NATO summit in Brussels, Biden said that China and Russia were trying to split the transatlantic alliance and that while he was not seeking conflict with Russia, NATO would respond if Moscow continued its harmful activities.
I'm going to make clear to President Putin that there are areas where we can cooperate if he chooses. And if he chooses not to cooperate and acts in a way that he has in the past relative to cybersecurity and some other activities, then we will respond. We will respond in kind. There need not be. We should decide where it's in our mutual interest, in the interest of the world, to cooperate and see if we can do that. And the areas where we don't agree, make it clear what the red lines are.
Before the meeting, the security has been tightened by the Swiss authorities in and around the villa. A temporary restriction on Geneva airspace from June 15th to 17th is in place and the lakefront has been shut down. More than 3,000 police personnel will guard the villa, the airport, the diplomatic missions and the hotels. Bureau Report, DD News.
All right, time now for our In Focus segment in which we are discussing about New Age multilateral diplomacy. And joining me are two very special guests, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash and Professor Swaran Singh. Now, Ambassador Prakash is a former Indian envoy to South Korea and Canada, and Professor Singh teaches at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. Ambassador Prakash and Professor Singh, welcome to Newsnight. Good to see you. Ambassador Prakash, if I can start with you. First G7 and now NATO, both summits issuing back-to-back rebukes on China and against China. What's your take on what is happening as we speak?
Good evening, Mr. Ramachandran. It is nice to be on the discussion with you.
Welcome.
Certainly, there is a change of tone, no doubt about it. That China is being named is new or comparatively new. There were China earlier used to be alluded to. There is a reference to China 10 times in the NATO communique and 3 times in the G7 communique.
Right.
So yes, and positions have hardened against China, there is no doubt. But there are some unusual sentences or formulations in the NATO communique. It says, and I'm reading, China is also cooperating militarily with Russia, including through participation in Russian exercises in the Euro-Atlantic area. Now, can I ask a rhetorical question? What is wrong with that? Doesn't China or Russia or India or USA have a right to participate and cooperate with anybody that they want to militarily? So, it is a little unusual. Now, again, coming to the positives, there is certainly increasing number of countries in the world which are subscribing to the vision of Indo-Pacific. Quad summit has happened, another will be happening soon. There is more naval activity in the South China Sea, so there are pointers. And also it is interesting that President Xi Jinping recently called upon the Communist Party officials to present an image of a credible, lovable, and respectable China. So obviously they are taking note of the fact that there is growing unfavorable opinion, but let us look at the ground reality.
Sure.
Ramesh, not one nation wants to choose between China and the US. Trade and economic links remain intact, including of the US. Our own trade with China in the first 5 months has grown noticeably. US continues to engage China, and I would like to point out here that it calls China a serious competitor, not an adversary. And like it or not, if I were to be candid, there is a conflict fatigue that the US and the NATO allies face. There is no appetite to take on China militarily. I'm not saying they should, but a message becomes credible only if you're wielding a big stick, waving it, not using it. And I don't see that being in place as of yet. China, on the other hand, uses conflict as a tool to enhance its political or diplomatic efforts. So yes, we have challenges.
Sure.
If you ask me whether Chinese leadership is losing sleep, no, they are not.
Okay.
But they are taking note of the fact that there is a growing convergence in the outlook of the free world. Ramesh.
Indeed. Professor Singh, listening to Ambassador Prakash, I'm tempted to quote Shakespeare saying it's all sound and fury signifying nothing. Is that your take as well? Or do you think the democracies of the world, G7 and NATO, are predominantly democracies? Do you think the G7 and NATO have put China on notice?
I think, Ramesh, you notice this shift. NATO ultimately is a military alliance and they have to talk about threats and enemies. But there is a certain effort to bring in normative discourse into it. So emphasis repeatedly on democratic rule, norms, rule-based governance. And of course, it is an attempt to give a positive spin to the global affairs. For example, much of the world has been focused on pandemic. Effort at G7 and NATO has been to showcase that there is a sort of also effort to cooperate and find new solutions. So normative discourse is being added and democracies are being talked about, a positive spin is being given. So NATO indeed is also searching for its a new role in that sense. Just as Joe Biden is sort of reclaiming that space for himself and for United States. United States global leadership remains undergirded by NATO. So NATO has to be reactivated and sort of strengthened again. So there is a little sense of language like aggressive actions of Russia are a threat to Euro-Atlantic alliance. Not really saying China is an enemy, Russia is an enemy, but still nevertheless showcasing that there are threats where NATO becomes relevant, but at the same time bringing in the normative discourses of engagement, democracies, soft balancing China and Russia in that sense. So I think it's basically an attempt at reclaiming global leadership by United States and of course reactivating NATO. The host country in case of G7 itself is in sort of a certain amount of stress because of Brexit. They are trying to showcase global Britain again, so it serves them also. So I think there's a little falling shy of calling Russia or China as enemies, which is what the conventional understanding of NATO would demand to justify it as a military alliance. So NATO is rediscovering itself, adding on new kind of issues on the table for itself, making sure their focus is much more on cyber threats rather than physical military threats. So in that sense, one notices a kind of redefinition of NATO to still keep it as the central organization which maintains global leadership of G7 and its industrialized nations.
Right.
But it's not going to be easy to soft balance either Russia or China. And as Ambassador just mentioned, the kind of disturbance they feel in terms of Russia and China coming closer is clearly something that potentially becomes a major challenge for both sort of G7 and NATO because it's an economic strength. Russia is an energy powerhouse, a nuclear weapon state. So is China, of course, big economy. And Belt and Road Initiative is being countered gradually by G7 through the B3W now. So challenges have changed in that sense. It's no longer hardcore nuclear military existential threat that Russia or China are posing these nations. And therefore a more nuanced way of projecting what is the challenge to these nations. And therefore strategies have to be likewise revised. And NATO now talks about not just nuclear weapons or defense, but also talks about other areas that are seen as challenges, competition and threats, which again is in terms of creating a certain environment for Joe Biden's meeting with President Putin. Both sides are kind of repeatedly saying there are space for cooperation, but we are ready for the worst case scenario, which is typically a kind of environment building. And I don't see really them taking their, their crossing swords at any stage.
Indeed. Ambassador Prakash, we spoke about the G7 and NATO communiques. Let's look at it from India's perspective now, if you will. What is in it for India? Now, on the one hand, the G7 and NATO are critical of China, but on the other hand, some would say India is becoming increasingly indispensable to finding solutions to global crises, be it the Indo-Pacific or the COVID-19 economic recovery or climate change, you name it. India is increasingly becoming vital to the G7 and the other like-minded organizations.
I would agree with that. Broadly, I would agree. India is in a geography which is very crucial. India is a country which has a long continental border with China. India is literally at a very important geographical location in the Indian Ocean. And certainly the role that India has been playing in all spheres as a fast-growing economy, as a valuable member of Quad, as the pharmacy of the world, and the kind of constructive positions that we have taken are always taken note of. And the Indo-Pacific vision has been crafted keeping in mind India and for a pivotal role to be played by India. So there is no doubt about it. At the same time, to me, it has always been obvious, and it becomes even more obvious now, that regardless of lip service, and I'm saying that very consciously, lip service being paid to multilateralism, what we see is nationalism. Whether it is vaccine nationalism, whether there is protectionism, the basic effort is, and naturally so, to take care of your own interests. So while cooperation is good, we have to leverage our relations with countries, but we as a large nation with interests which are India specific, nobody will share India's interests 100%. We will have to take care of our own interests. And for us, it is very important, I would think, that we have to leverage all possible relations, given the fact that China is likely to be an adversary for a long time. Having good relations with Russia, with NATO countries, of course with the USA, is in our national interest. And if there is a thaw in the US-Russia relations, I think it is to our advantage and advantage of the peace-loving countries in the world.
Absolutely. Professor Singh, as Ambassador Prakash indicated, at the end of the day, if you look beyond the optics, at the end of the day, India will have to deal with the situation on its own. But in that context, as Biden says, America is back. So from your vantage, your perspective, how do you look at the world of multilateralism shaping up in the near term?
Clearly, I agree with Ambassador Vishnu Prakash. India will have to fend for itself ultimately, but it is part of fending for oneself that you go along and build consensus and join these larger groupings to showcase your larger acceptance around the world.
Right.
So if you notice that these nations led by United States are trying to separate in that sense both Russia and China as authoritarian regimes, they have to continuously, highlight democracies. And India is the largest democracy on the planet, so they will have to take India along in that sense of saying these are democracies and they are trying to work together. It serves India to sit on all those big tables and showcase the bonhomie that it has with larger, bigger powers. India also is literally the largest population in that sense. So the challenges that are coming enormously now, including the pandemic, are largely challenges to humanity. And therefore, simply the fact that India will be able to fend for its own population would mean taking care of 18% of the global humankind. And in that sense, India becomes relevant. India also becomes relevant, as you know, these developed nations, industrialized nations, had focused much more on research and development and innovation, allowing countries like China and India to do the production lines.
Right.
So for vaccine, for example, India is a great country to produce vaccinations for which research can happen in developed nations, and therefore that complementarity again comes in, that India is perhaps the only country that can provide medicines at such cost-effective prices, which are important when it comes to large number of least developed nations and developing countries. So India has its own attractions, I would say, when it comes to being co-opted and engaged and indulged by these G7 and NATO nations. Of course, they also want to make sure that India is on their side, because if China is the challenge, India is the next door neighbor of China with a sort of uncomfortable relationship. The reverse would be that they want to wean away India from Russia, because Russia-India relationship is long-standing, and weaning away India is just as important as propping India against China. So
Right.
India has its own relevance. I think it is important for us to cultivate that, knowing fully well that these have their own intangible advantages of being acceptable around the world, brings enormous amount of goodwill and credibility, and then of course use that relationships to sort out solutions and difficulties at home, sort of deal with our own challenges at home. But
Right.
when you're connected with all the movers and shakers around the world, that does help in your own strategies and efficacy in resolving your own problems.
Absolutely. And finally, I have one question each for both my guests. Ambassador Prakash, how do you think the India-China dynamic will play itself out going forward? Because as you mentioned, some issues need to be resolved bilaterally. In that context, how do you see the India-China dynamic playing itself out in the near term?
I wish I was optimistic. I wish I was optimistic. I think that the actions of China, the way they are going about it, the way they have not moved after the mutual withdrawal in Galwan, the dialogue is going on, which is very positive. But I think we'll have to have many more rounds. The fact that they are building permanent structure along the LAC, that troops are being rotated, that heavy weaponry is being brought in, mechanized divisions are there, and they continue with their denial. I mean, I can understand their denial, but the posturing, there has been no let up in the posturing. I am afraid that despite the fact that we still are maintaining trade relations to an extent and have other or particularly have a good dialogue going at various levels, we are in for the long haul. I don't see a very early solution, because China is not likely to cut any, is not likely to, they don't want to see the rise of India, and they will do everything possible to keep India under check.
Absolutely. In for the long haul, says Ambassador Prakash. Professor Singh, you get the last word. Your thoughts on the way forward in India-China ties, especially given the fact that India is a member of the G7 outreach, the G20 as well as BRICS. So how does this dynamic play itself out going forward?
I think, Ramesh, you put it very nicely. Just as India is being increasingly co-opted into these major forums of developed nations, China during the pandemic has found a certain hit upon its political goodwill. And it seems that these nations are using China challenge to bring themselves together, including India in that sense. So, as Ambassador Vishnu Prakash mentioned about the speech of Xi Jinping, they are now increasingly aware of need to build that goodwill. And I think BRICS summit meeting in September here in India would be a test case. I think that will bring President Xi Jinping to India, hopefully. And then I think that could be an opportunity to find out what can be done together. I don't think either Beijing or New Delhi wants to burn all their bridges with each other. There is increasing need for China to find friends, and India is the largest neighbor of China. So I think they will be very conscious of not really pushing it that far as to openly create confrontation with India. Indeed, Chinese would be looking at opportunities to at least showcase that they are able to manage relationship with India.
All right, on that point, may I thank both my guests, Ambassador Prakash and Professor Singh, for making time for us here on DD India. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Right, and now to the other this big story we are tracking here on Newsnight in particular, and we're discussing about the issue of India's vaccination drive, and we are joined by a very eminent guest, Dr. N.K. Arora, Chairman, Technical Advisory Group on COVID-19 immunization. Dr. Arora, welcome to Newsnight. If I can start with the obvious question first. Now, as you are part of this committee in this group, and we have decided to, expand the gap between two Covishield doses to 12 to 16 weeks. What kind of data did the committee or the group rely on to come to this decision, Dr. Arora?
Thank you very much, Ramesh, for inviting me for this very important dialogue. India has currently two vaccines, Covishield and Covaxin.
Right.
Covaxin is completely indigenously developed vaccine, while Covishield is under license from AstraZeneca, UK. And so Covishield, Covaxin is a lot of full studies have been done, and the interval between two doses of Covaxin are 4 weeks. And consistent studies have shown that this is the right interval.
Okay.
As far as Covishield is concerned, the initial studies were very heterogeneous. So although some countries, I would particularly say that UK went in for a dose interval of 12 weeks at the time of when they introduced on 31st or 30th December 2020. However, we were privy to all the data, but when we had to decide about the vaccine interval in first week of January, we said no. Our own data, the bridging trial which was done and which showed good immune response, we went in for 4 weeks. Subsequently, we came across additional data, both basic laboratory data as well as scientific data. And we felt after 6 weeks or so that we should increase the interval between two doses from 4 weeks to 8 weeks. And the purpose was that some of the studies were showing that vaccine efficacy is about 57% when it is 4 weeks, and it is about 60% when it is 8 weeks. And there was a discussion why don't we increase it to 12 weeks at that time.
Right.
However, we said we must wait for the ground level data from UK, which is the biggest other biggest user of AstraZeneca, because other parts of the Europe and North America are not using. Very small amounts are being used in some Asian and African countries. So in April, last week of April, we got to see this data from Public Health England, and which showed that when the interval is 12 weeks, the vaccine efficacy was varying between 65% to 88%. There were 3 studies on that.
Okay.
And this was the basis on which they overcome their epidemic outbreak also. We are aware that there is this alpha variant, which originally came up in UK, and they had a very bad time in December, January, and February. And they came out of that, and during this, the interval they had kept was 12 weeks. Now, so we also thought that this may be a good idea because there is basic fundamental scientific reasons also,
right,
that adenovectored vaccines, if you give them at shorter interval, then the response may not be as good, but as you increase the interval, the response becomes better. And that was one of the bases. And so this decision was taken on 13th of May. And that we will increase to 12 to 16 weeks. And we have a very open and transparent system and taking scientific basis of increasing the dose interval. The COVID working group took that decision.
Okay.
And there were no dissenting voice. And then this issue was discussed threadbare in a meeting of NTAGI and in which again there were no dissenting notes, and the recommendation was that the vaccine interval will be 12 to 16 weeks. Basically, flexibility has to be given to the community also, because everybody cannot come on the dot the day you say 12 weeks or so. So 12 to 16 weeks, this flexibility was given. And there was other examples that, like countries like Canada and Sri Lanka, and there are 2 or 3 other countries which are also using a 12 to 16 week interval for AstraZeneca vaccine, which is the same as Covishield vaccine. And NEGVEC cleared that. So the whole process is done in a very transparent manner.
Okay.
It undergoes complete discussion, and there were no dissenting voices, because there have been occasions when people had dissent, and when this dissent is passed on and it is in front of NTAGI if there are dissent. And even NEGVEC is also aware of those dissenting. But as far as this decision was concerned, there were no dissents. And so we have gone in for that. Immediately, in fact, 2 or 3 days later, there were reports again from UK that if the only single dose is given of AstraZeneca, the protection is only 33%. When 2 doses are given, then the protection is about 60%.
Okay.
And at this time, there has been a discussion going on since the middle of May about this, whether India should revert back to 8 weeks or 4 weeks. But at around the same time, we are privy to several studies, which have 2 of these have been published now. And it was also decided when NTAGI took this decision that India will establish a vaccine tracking platform, where we are not only looking at the impact of the disease, impact of the vaccination program, but also look at the type of vaccine, what is the impact, because we have 2 vaccines, tomorrow we will have 3, and that is also important. Second is interval between the 2 vaccines, and what happens if somebody is partially immunized or somebody is completely immunized, because it is very important. In India, as of yesterday or today, it's about 25 crore doses, and about 17-18 crores have received only 1 dose, and remaining about 6-7 crores have received 2 doses. Now total that makes I think I'm wrong, it's about 4 crores or 5 crores, 4 crore people have received 2 doses, and remaining 17-18 crore people have received only single dose. And we find, and in fact we are over the hump as far as this Delta variant is concerned, which really swept across the country in a very ferocious manner. We had peak of 400,000 plus cases during first week of May, and now it has come down to below 80,000 per day. It has rapidly come down also. But all through, our elderly people have been immunized. Simultaneously, 2 very other important issues have also, studies have been published. One study which has been published by PGI Chandigarh, which very clearly shows, and it is done in a large number of health providers, that those who are partially immunized, that means only 1 dose, versus those who are immunized with 2 doses, and there was a large group who were not immunized. There were health workers. The vaccine effectiveness was about 75% with both whether you are partially immunized or fully immunized. So at least in the short run, the vaccine effectiveness was similar whether you are partially single dose or you are getting double dose. It also means single dose means that your interval between doses is larger, but still you are protected. Now, 3 days ago or 4 days ago, another very important study has come from CMC Vellore. And so the Chandigarh study came up in relation to the alpha variant or UK variant, which had swept Punjab, northern India, and came up to Delhi. And that is what it is. Now look at the other part from Tamil Nadu, which covers most of the current epidemic wave which India faced. That is April and May. And this study shows that if somebody is partially immunized, the vaccine effectiveness of Covishield is 61%. And when it is receiving 2 doses, somebody who is receiving 2 doses, the effectiveness is 65%. And there is very little difference because there is a certain degree of uncertainty when you calculate these, make these assumptions and calculations.
Indeed.
So overall, what I am trying to say is that decisions are taken on scientific evidence.
Right.
Adenovirus vectored vaccines behave differently in different contexts because the background circulation of the virus on which the COVID antigen is put in, they are different. And third is India has made very robust mechanism to continuously look at what is the other ongoing scientific evidence. So I have quoted these 2 studies from PGI Chandigarh. The other is from CMC Vellore. There is a study coming up. 2 studies are coming up from 2 different organizations within Delhi. And both the studies are showing that when single dose is given, the breakthrough infection, because ultimately you are worried कि भाई इसको दोबारा कोरोना हो सकता है कि नहीं हो सकता. That's one of the key issues.
Indeed.
So breakthrough infection with 1 dose is around 4% individuals, and the other with when you have 2 doses, it's around 5%. Basically, there is no very little difference between the 2, and which indirectly means. And similarly, the other study shows 1.5 to 2% breakthrough infections. So what I am trying to say is that as decisions are taken, investigators are encouraged across the country to see that simultaneously we keep on getting Indian data, because actual ground data from India is very important. And finally, now we are in the process. In fact, tomorrow we have the second meeting of National Vaccine Informatics and Data Analytics meeting. A ICMR is setting up a vaccine tracking platform where data from 3 sources, one from COVID platform where vaccines are given. That data will be superimposed by the laboratory data where RT-PCR is being done, so that we know those who have received vaccine, whether they have got any corona infection. And third is the disease-related epidemiological information, which is Ministry of Health and NCDS is collecting. There is harmonization process between these 3 data sources. And the whole purpose is that on a regular basis, we will come back to the community, to everybody, that what is the response to various vaccines, what is the effect, what is the impact of the type of vaccine, what is the impact of duration between vaccines, what is the impact of partial immunization versus complete immunization, because vaccination is not a compulsory issue. There are a lot of people, as I said, 75% people have received only partial immunization. So it is important that we monitor that component also. And as we increase and enlarge the immunization program, the issues will become more complex. We may have 6 vaccines. So all of us vaccines have to be seen. And here I would also like to say that India has a very robust system of monitoring adverse events, that if there are any adverse events following vaccines. So what I'm trying to say is all decisions are science-based and done in a transparent manner. Whenever there is a dissent from any member of the NTAGI or COVID working group, this is documented into the minutes, and then only one moves forward with these decisions.
Absolutely. So as you said, Dr. Arora, that the decision to extend or expand the gap between 2 Covishield doses, 1, based on science, 2, transparent, and 3, in this particular issue, there were no dissenting voices. It was a unanimous choice or decision. And very quickly, Dr. Arora, if you don't mind, now that we're talking about the Delta variant, is there any proposal to reduce the gap like the UK has done? Very quickly, please.
So I would like to tell all our viewers that nothing is cast in stone. It's the corona is a very dynamic process. The vaccination is a dynamic process. Tomorrow we will see if we find our vaccine platform tells us that the narrower interval is better for our people, even if it has a 5 or 10% benefit. I'm sure that the committee will take a decision on its wisdom and its merit. Or tomorrow anything else comes that, okay, the current decision is fine. We will continue with that because ultimately it is the health and protection provided to our community is paramount. That is the most important thing which drives our discussions, generation of new scientific evidence and decision making.
Absolutely. On that note, may I thank you, Dr. Arora, for making time for us and sharing your insights with our viewers at home and abroad. Appreciate it. Right, and talking about the COVID situation in the country, India is witnessing a steady decline in the daily number of COVID cases as the central and state governments together fight the pandemic. Now, as the gradual unlocking of states takes place across the country, the Health Ministry has once again reminded people to follow COVID-appropriate behavior in order to avoid a surge in infections. More in the next report.
A steady decline in the number of fresh COVID-19 cases is being witnessed across the country. Since last 8 days, not only the daily new cases are declining, but the positivity rate is also going down, maintaining its daily trajectory below 5%. Going by the numbers, India reported 60,471 daily new cases in last 24 hours, lowest after 75 days. Almost 85% decline in cases have been witnessed since the highest peak. Less than 1,000 new cases are being reported every day from 27 states across the nation. Cases have decreased across 366 districts in the country. India's active case load has declined to 9,13,378. 1,17,525 patients have recovered during the last 24 hours. Daily recoveries continue to outnumber daily new cases for the 33rd consecutive day. Recovery rate has increased to 95.64%. Daily positivity rate stands at 3.45% and has remained below 5% for 8 consecutive days.
27 स्टेट देश में ऐसी हैं जहां पर कि 1000 से कम संख्या में डेली केसेस रिपोर्ट हो रहे हैं। यह इसलिए समझना जरूरी है कि इससे इंडिकेट होता है कि ओवरऑल इन्फेक्शन का डिक्लाइन देश में हम लोग नोट कर रहे हैं। साथ ही हमने देखा है कि ऑलमोस्ट हर स्टेट्स में पॉजिटिविटी में जो ड्रास्टिक रिडक्शन हुआ है, उसके तहत 16 स्टेट ऐसी हैं जहां पर कि वीकली पॉजिटिविटी अब 5% से भी कम हो गई है।
The government reiterated that there is no need to panic about children getting infected from any future wave of COVID-19.
जैसे 1 से 10 साल में पिछले साल करीब 3.28% केसेस में इन्फेक्शन पाया गया, उसी के अनुपात में सेकेंड वेव में 3.05% पाया गया। साथ ही 11 से 20 वर्ग में अगर हम देखें कि 8.03% लोग इन्फेक्ट हुए, तो उसी के प्रोपोर्शन में 8.57% पॉपुलेशन इस पर्टिकुलर एज ग्रुप की सेकेंड वेव में भी इन्फेक्ट हुई। हम आपके द्वारा यह विनती करना चाहते हैं, हमें सतर्क रहना है, हमें हर एज ग्रुप के लिए सतर्क रहना है, लेकिन भय का वातावरण क्रिएट ना हो।
The Health Ministry also said that a new variant called Delta Plus has been witnessed in countries outside India. It was first detected in the month of March and India is keeping an eye on this new variant.
The present status is that yes, a new variant has been found. This is a variant of interest. This is not as yet classified as a variant of concern. A variant of concern is one in which we have understood that there are adverse consequences to humanity. Transmissibility बढ़ जाती है, severity बढ़ जाती है, etc. वो अभी इसके बारे में मालूम नहीं है, लेकिन जो चेंज आई है, जिस तरह से आई है, उसके इफेक्ट को अब साइंटिफिक तरीके से वॉच करना चाहिए।
As the country is gradually unlocking, the Health Ministry has once again warned the citizens of not letting the guards down at this crucial juncture.
हमारा युवा वर्ग हो, वह अगर बाहर भी निकले, कोई भी ट्रैवल करे या कोई पब्लिक ट्रांसपोर्ट का इस्तेमाल करे, तो उसको क्या प्रिकॉशंस रखनी है, यह बहुत आवश्यक है। नहीं तो जैसे कि कई बार कहा गया है, जो कुछ संजोया है, जो कुछ पाया है, वह हम फिर से खो सकते हैं।
हमें ये लेके एक्स्ट्रा प्रिकॉशन लेनी चाहिए कि ये वाला जो वायरस है, ये ज़्यादा चालाक वायरस हो गया है 2020 के मुकाबले में, तो उससे भी ज़्यादा चौकसी, रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी, केयर, प्रिवेंशन, ये सब हमें करना पड़ेगा। ये रास्ता बिल्कुल क्लियर है, इसके बिना सिचुएशन फिर खराब हो सकती है।
As the fight against COVID-19 continues, vaccination, following COVID-19 appropriate behavior, wearing masks, washing hands frequently and using sanitizers remains the top and most effective strategy against this highly lethal and dangerous foe. Bureau Report, DD India.
And with that, it's a wrap. But news continues here on DD India. You can catch all the latest updates on our social media, mobile and digital platforms. Remember, wear a mask. It's for your own good. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.